My name is Margaret Holbrook. For most of my
Count
adult
to
life,
10.
I've been the steady hand holding my family's world together, and for a long time, I thought that was enough to earn their respect. Trust me, you'll regret skipping this story. So before you sit back and listen, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to Grace's Truth. Now get in the mood to listen to this story, because it might be the ultimate quiet revenge. It started with small things, the sort of moments you could almost laugh off if you didn't stop to think about them. A distracted when I tried to share an idea during dinner. A quick change of subject whenever I brought up something that mattered to me. A subtle roll of the eyes when I reminded my son about a bill, or when I asked my daughter about her spending habits. At first, I told myself I was being too sensitive. After all, families tease each other, right? But the teasing didn't feel lighthearted anymore. It felt like my words were brushed aside, like my thoughts had no real weight in my own home. Our kitchen had always been the heart of our house, warm sunlit in the mornings, carrying the smells of coffee and cinnamon toast. But lately, it had turned into a place where my voice seemed to disappear before it even left my mouth. My husband Thomas would scroll through his phone while I spoke. My son Eric, now 25, would smirk knowingly at his sister as if sharing a private joke about me. And my daughter Chloe, 19, would give me that flat, polite smile, the one you give a stranger when you're waiting for them to stop talking. It hurt in a way I couldn't quite put into words. These were the people I had poured my life into. Every day for decades I had managed their schedules, made sure the bills were paid, opened and organized the bank accounts, so that all they had to do was swipe a card and get what they needed. But lately, it was as if that steady support had made me invisible. I noticed how they spoke about money when they thought I wasn't listening. Eric would tell Chloe, "Just put it on the card, Mom won't even notice." Chloe would laugh and say, "Yeah, she's like an unlimited tap." An unlimited tap. It stung more than I wanted to admit. I wasn't an endless resource. I was a person. Yet in their minds, I was no different from an ATM, always available, always reliable, and entirely without feelings. I think the moment that really planted the seed for what I eventually did happened one Friday evening. We were having dinner together, a rare occurrence since Eric had been staying out late with friends, and Chloe was busy with classes and a new boyfriend. The conversation was light until Thomas decided to tell a joke. "Maggie," he said, grinning, "you know you're lucky you've got us to handle all the modern stuff. You wouldn't even know how to pay for something with your phone if we weren't around." The kids laughed. It wasn't even that funny, but the laughter was loud, almost eager. I smiled tightly and took a sip of water, but inside, I could feel something twisting. I've been running a business for over 15 years, managing both online and in-store payments, handling digital banking long before my husband even downloaded his first app. And yet, in that moment, I wasn't the competent woman who kept everything running. I was the out-of-touch mom they could joke about. It's strange how disrespect doesn't always come with shouting or insults. Sometimes it comes wrapped in laughter, disguised as just kidding. But make no mistake, it's still disrespect. Over the next few weeks, I began paying attention with sharper eyes. Thomas had ordered a new tablet without even mentioning it to me, charging it to one of the accounts I managed. Chloe was buying clothes online every other day. Eric's account showed regular cash withdrawals, hundreds at a time, with no explanation. I didn't confront them right away. I've learned that in moments like this, patience can be more powerful than anger. Instead, I took quiet mental notes. I started reviewing the bank statements more thoroughly, even pulling transaction histories from the last 6 months. What I found only deepened the ache in my chest and the resolve in my heart. It wasn't about the money. Not really. I could afford what they were spending. But the carelessness, the entitlement, the assumption that I'd simply nod along and keep the accounts open, that was what I couldn't tolerate anymore. There's a particular kind of loneliness that comes from being surrounded by people you love who no longer listen to you. It's like being in a crowded room where your voice is trapped inside a glass jar. You can see them, hear them, but they don't truly see or hear you. One night, I lay awake in bed next to Thomas. He was already asleep, his phone still glowing faintly on the nightstand. I stared at the ceiling, feeling that familiar tightness in my chest. I thought about all the years I had been the one to make sure we never missed a mortgage payment, that birthdays and holidays were celebrated, that they could focus on living because I had already handled the logistics of life for them. And for what to be laughed at over dinner, to be treated like an endless, nameless source of funds, I didn't know it yet. But that was the night my plan began to take shape. Not an act of cruelty, not even of revenge, but of reclamation. I needed them to remember that respect is not a given. It's earned, and it must be kept. I woke the next morning with an unusual clarity. The air felt sharp, like the morning after a storm when everything is washed clean, except in my mind, it wasn't a storm that had passed. It was one that was quietly forming. I didn't say anything to Thomas or the kids over breakfast. Thomas was reading the news on his tablet, Chloe was scrolling on her phone, and Eric had his earbuds in head, bent over his coffee. I sat there sipping my tea, letting my eyes pass over them one by one. They didn't notice. That morning, after they left for work, school, and errands, I sat at my desk in the corner of the living room, the place where I usually handled orders for my home decor business, and I opened my personal laptop. Not the family computer that everyone had access to, but my own machine. I logged into our bank accounts. One by one, Thomas's account first. His card was linked to the main household account that I funded from my business earnings and some joint investments. I scanned the transactions, expensive dinners with colleagues, recurring charges for subscription services we never even discussed, and the tablet he'd bought without telling me, nearly $1,000 gone in one swipe. Then Eric's account. I felt my mouth tighten as I saw withdrawals of $200, $300, sometimes two, in the same week. His paycheck from the small marketing job he had barely covered rent for his apartment. The rest came from the card I'd given him years ago when he started college, just in case you need it. It had become less of a safety net and more of a permanent lifeline. Finally, Chloe's account. Hers was a constant stream of online purchases, clothes, shoes, skincare products. She even had a habit of ordering food delivery when she was in the same house as my fully stocked kitchen. I sat back in my chair and exhaled slowly. For years, I'd told myself that helping them financially was my way of giving them stability. But what I saw in front of me wasn't stability, it was dependence. And worse, it was entitlement. That afternoon, I went to the bank in person. I told the banker, a woman named Lisa, who'd known me for years, that I wanted a full printed list of all accounts and cards under my name. She raised her eyebrows but didn't ask questions. I left with a neatly stapled packet that felt heavier than it should have. When I got home, I spread it out on the dining table. It looked like a map of my life and theirs over the past decade. Every account I had opened just to make things easier, every card linked to me, but used by them, every overdraft fee I had quietly covered. The deeper I went, the more I realized something I hadn't dared to admit before: they didn't see my generosity as generosity anymore. It had become invisible to them, like running water or electricity, always there, always expected. That night, Thomas came home late. He kissed my cheek distractedly and went straight to the fridge. "You okay? You're quiet," he said, pulling out a beer. "I'm fine," I said, and I meant it, but it wasn't the kind of fine he thought. It was the fine that comes when you've decided something. Over the next few days, I began watching them more carefully. Thomas using his card to buy yet another gadget online. Chloe trying on new clothes in her room tag still attached. Eric laughing over the phone, telling a friend, "Don't worry, my mom's got it." I wasn't angry anymore. I was resolute. One morning, I brewed my tea, sat down with the packet from the bank, and made a decision: I would block every single card I had opened for them. Not forever, but long enough for them to feel what it's like to stand on their own. I picked a date: the following Monday. It would give me the weekend to prepare and make sure all my personal finances were secure. In those 3 days, I moved my business income into a separate account only I could access. I restructured the savings account so that the automatic transfers feeding their cards would stop. And I set up online banking alerts not for them, but for me, so I could see the fallout in real time when the cards stopped working. By Sunday night, everything was in place. I went to bed feeling lighter than I had in months. Monday morning, after they all left, I sat down at my desk and logged into the bank portal. One by one, I clicked the block option next to each of their cards. A little red notification popped up each time this card has been successfully deactivated. When the last one was done, I closed my laptop and made myself another cup of tea. I thought I'd feel nervous. I thought guilt might creep in. But instead, I felt something else entirely, a quiet satisfaction. Not out of revenge, but because I knew this was the only way to reset the balance. The first call came at 12:17 p.m. It was Thomas. "Hey, did you pay the card bill this month?" "Mine just got declined at lunch with the guys." "I paid it," I said evenly, "but I blocked the card." "You..." "What?" His voice was incredulous, like he'd misheard me. "I blocked it." "You don't need it. Use your own account." There was a pause, then a half laugh of disbelief. "Is this some kind of joke?" "No," I said. "It's not." Chloe's text came at 12:43 p.m. "Mom, my card isn't working. I was trying to order shoes. Did you forget to pay?" I replied. "No, I blocked it. We'll talk when you get home." Eric's call came at 1:02 p.m., full of frustration. "Mom, I can't get gas. The pump says my card's invalid." "I'm aware," I said calmly. "We'll discuss it tonight." By the time I hung up, I knew the storm was coming. But unlike before, I wasn't bracing for it with dread, I was ready. By the time I heard the sound of the garage door groaning open that evening, the air in the house already felt charged. I'd lit no lamps yet. The kitchen was dim, except for the golden spill of light from the hallway. I stood at the counter, stirring a pot of soup with deliberate calm. The first to enter was Chloe. She didn't even bother with her usual "Hi, Mom." She dropped her bag on the floor with a heavy thud and stood there, arms crossed. "Why did you block my card?" she demanded. Before I could answer, Eric came in right behind her, car keys jangling. He still smelled faintly of gasoline, probably from that failed attempt at filling his tank. "Yeah, Mom. What the hell?" I was stranded at the station for half an hour. I kept stirring, letting the silence stretch just long enough for them to notice the absence of panic in my voice. "We'll wait for your father," I said. They exchanged irritated glances. Chloe muttered something under her breath. I caught the word ridiculous. Thomas came in 10 minutes later, briefcase in hand, his face already tight with annoyance. "Maggie, we need to talk," he said, not even taking off his coat. "My card got declined in front of my colleagues today. Do you have any idea how embarrassing that was?" I turned off the stove and placed the ladle down slowly. Then I looked at all three of them. "Yes," I said simply. "I know exactly how embarrassing it feels when people don't respect you. I've been feeling that way in my own home for years." They froze. "What are you talking about?" Thomas asked, his voice a mix of irritation and confusion. I walked into the dining room, the place where we'd shared countless meals, and where lately I'd been the butt of quiet jokes and dismissive smirks. I pulled out the thick packet from the bank and laid it on the table. "This," I said. "Tapping the papers is every account, every card, every transaction linked to me. Do you know how many of these cards I opened for you? How many bills I paid without you even noticing?" Thomas frowned. Chloe shrugged. Eric glanced at the papers like they were in a foreign language. "I've been managing this family's finances for decades," I continued, my voice steady, but not raised. "I've kept the lights on, made sure there was always food, paid for the things you wanted, not just what you needed. And somewhere along the way, you all stopped seeing that. You stopped seeing me." Chloe rolled her eyes, and that tiny, careless motion lit something in me. "You," I said, looking directly at her, ordered over $1,000 worth of clothes last month. Clothes that are still sitting in your closet with the tags on. You didn't even ask. You just assumed the money would be there. She opened her mouth to protest, but I held up my hand. And you? I turned to Eric, withdrawing hundreds in cash every week, telling your friends, my mom's got it. Do you have any idea how that feels to hear Eric's jaw tightened? I didn't mean anything by it. That's the problem, I said. You didn't think about it at all. Finally, I faced Thomas. You, of all people, should understand. You run a business. You know how important it is to account for every expense. And yet you've been charging gadget subscriptions, dinners, not from your income, but from the account I maintain. You laughed about me not knowing how to use modern payment methods, remember? That night at dinner, his eyes shifted. He didn't deny it. The silence that followed was heavy. I could hear the faint ticking of the kitchen clock in the next room. I blocked the cards, I said finally, because I needed you to feel the absence of what I've been providing. Not just financially, but in presence, in attention, in care. I am not an unlimited tap. I am a person. And I deserve the same respect I've given you. For a moment, none of them spoke. Then Chloe scoffed. So this is some kind of punishment. It's a boundary I corrected. One I should have set a long time ago. Eric muttered, "You could have just talked to us." I gave a small, humorless laugh. I have. Over and over. But you didn't hear me. You only hear me now because your cards don't work. Thomas finally pulled out a chair and sat down, his expression less combative now. So what happens next? He asked. You start using your own money, I said. You budget, you plan. You stop treating me like a safety net for every whim. The cards will stay blocked until I see consistent responsibility and respect. And when that happens, maybe I'll consider reopening one for emergencies only. Until then, you stand on your own. Dinner that night was quiet. They ate the soup without much conversation. I could tell they were all adjusting to the idea, the inconvenience, the discomfort, the loss of control over something they'd always taken for granted. But underneath it all, I felt a calm I hadn't known in years. Not the fragile kind that depends on keeping the peace, but the steady kind that comes from knowing you've reclaimed something you were slowly losing. My place in this family was about to change because I had decided it would. The first week without the cards was like watching a play unfold, each family member acting out their role, complete with improvisations I hadn't anticipated. Chloe was the most vocal. On Tuesday, I heard her in her room pacing and talking on the phone to a friend. I swear she's doing this just to mess with me. Now I have to wait until payday to buy those boots. And my car needs gas, so I might have to cancel Saturday. Her tone was equal parts frustration and disbelief, as if running out of money before the end of the week was an absurdity that should never touch her life. Eric was quieter, but his frustration seeped through in other ways. He started coming home more often, rummaging through the fridge and taking leftovers instead of ordering out. I noticed him eyeing the gas gauge on his car like it was an enemy plotting against him. Thomas, on the other hand, seemed to be trying to outweight me. He still used his own account for work expenses, but I could tell he was hoping I'd tire of this little experiment and restore his access. By Friday, the first cracks began to show. That morning, I was kneading dough for bread when Thomas walked in holding a bill. "Maggie, the utility payment is due. It's in my name, but it comes out of the card you blocked. Want me to pay it from my account?" The question was almost too casual, but I heard the edge beneath it. "Yes," I said, without looking up from the dough. There was a pause. "So you're serious about this? It's not just symbolic?" I finally met his eyes. "Thomas, I've never been more serious about anything in my life." He exhaled, muttered something under his breath, and left the room. That evening, Eric came into the kitchen, hovering near the counter where I was chopping vegetables. "Mom, can I borrow $50? Just until Friday," I set down the knife. "For what, gas? And maybe a few groceries. I'm trying to stretch what I have left." The sincerity in his voice caught me off guard. For the first time, there was no defensiveness, no entitlement, just an admission of limitation. "I'll make you a deal," I said. "I'll fill your tank once this week, but that's it. And I expect you to budget for the rest. No borrowing, no, just until Friday." He nodded reluctantly, and I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. This was a new reality for him, and he didn't like it, but he wasn't fighting it the way Chloe was. Saturday brought the first real confrontation. Chloe stormed into the living room mid-morning, waving her phone. "This is ridiculous. I was at the store ready to buy a dress for the dinner next week, and I had to put it back. I had to walk out because I couldn't pay. Do you know how humiliating that is?" I kept my voice calm. "Yes, I do." She blinked, thrown off by my answer. "So you're okay with me looking like an idiot in front of everyone? I'm okay with you learning that money has limits," I said. "And that those limits exist whether or not you want to see them." She threw her hands up. "You've completely lost it, Mom. All because you think we don't appreciate you." "No," I said, "because you don't respect me. There's a difference." She didn't reply, just stomped upstairs and slammed her door. By Sunday, the house felt different. It wasn't just about the cards anymore. It was about the shifting ground beneath us. Conversations were shorter. Requests were phrased more cautiously. Even Thomas seemed to think twice before asking for anything. That afternoon, I decided to take a quiet moment for myself. I made tea and sat by the window watching the late winter light fade into the horizon. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel invisible. That night, Thomas surprised me. After dinner, he stayed behind in the kitchen while the kids went upstairs. "I've been thinking," he said, leaning against the counter, "about what you said. Maybe I've been taking it for granted that you'd handle everything. And maybe I didn't realize how much you've done to keep things running." It wasn't a full apology, but it was more than I'd expected this early. "I don't want this to turn into a war," he added, "but I get why you're doing it. I'm just not sure the kids do yet." "They will," I said. "Eventually." And as I went to bed that night, I knew this was just the beginning. They were uncomfortable now, yes, but real change takes more than a week. The question wasn't whether they could survive without my cards. The question was whether they could grow without them. The following week was when the tension began to crystallize into open conflict. It started with Chloe. I was folding laundry in the living room when she came in, tossing her coat onto the armchair like it had wronged her personally. "Mom, this is getting ridiculous," she said, her voice sharp. "I just had to cancel my dinner with Rachel because I couldn't pay for my share. Everyone else split the bill on the spot, and I sat there like some charity case." I didn't look up immediately. I kept folding a towel, smoothing its edges before placing it neatly on the stack. "That's unfortunate," I said, "but maybe it's time you start planning for those things instead of assuming you can pay later." She rolled her eyes. "This isn't about planning, Mom. It's about you humiliating your own daughter." "Over what?" "Because we made a few jokes." I set down the towel and finally looked at her. "No, Chloe. Over years of you not valuing what I give you, not just the money, but my trust." She huffed, crossing her arms. "This isn't teaching me anything except that you can be petty." And then she stomped upstairs, slamming her bedroom door so hard a picture on the hallway wall rattled. Eric was different. He didn't complain as much. I noticed him carrying a lunch bag to work instead of buying food out. On Wednesday, I passed by the garage and saw him cleaning his car, probably in hopes of selling it. Later that night, he knocked on my door. "Mom, I've been thinking, I can start picking up extra shifts at work. I don't like being broke all the time, and I guess I shouldn't have been taking out cash so carelessly." It was a small admission, but it was genuine. "That sounds like a good plan," I said. "And if you need help with budgeting, I can show you." His shoulders relaxed a little. "Thanks. Just don't tell Chloe I said that." I smiled to myself after he left. One of them was starting to get it. Thomas, however, was another story. He'd been quiet, too quiet. One night after the kids had gone to bed, he finally spoke up. You know, Maggie, there are other ways to handle this. This whole financial lockdown is creating more drama than it's solving. I sipped my tea. It's not meant to solve everything overnight. It's meant to change the way we think about money and respect. He leaned back in his chair. But you're treating us like children. I set down my cup. I gave you access for years without question. I trusted you all to use it wisely. Instead, I was treated like a walking bank account. If you feel like this is childish, maybe it's because you're not used to limits. That earned me a tight-lipped frown. You're making this harder than it needs to be. Maybe I said evenly, but I'm making it necessary. By Friday night, the three of them seemed united not in understanding, but in frustration. We were all in the kitchen when it happened. Chloe started it. Dad, you agree this is insane, right? She's basically punishing us for existing. Thomas sighed. I think she's making a point, but maybe it's gone too far. Eric stayed quiet, eyes darting between us. This is exactly what I mean, I said. Instead of asking why I felt pushed to this point, you're all focused on how it inconveniences you. None of you are asking what you could do differently. Chloe threw up her hands. Because it's not about us. You're the one with the problem. Eric finally spoke, his voice low but steady. It is about us. I mean, she's right. We don't think about it. We just spend. I've been doing it for years. The silence after that was thick. Chloe looked betrayed, Thomas looked annoyed, and I felt an unexpected flicker of pride. That weekend, the household split into factions. Chloe avoided me entirely. Thomas kept our conversations short, and Eric quietly began adapting. He sold a few things online, started walking to nearby places instead of driving, and even cooked a few simple meals. One afternoon, I passed by the kitchen and found him helping himself to the soup I'd made, humming quietly. There was no tension in his shoulders, no resentment in his movements. He was adjusting, maybe even growing. Meanwhile, Chloe's anger only deepened. I overheard her on the phone complaining to her aunt, twisting the story to make it sound like I'd cut her off completely out of spite. I knew I could correct her, but I didn't. Sometimes people need their own narratives to justify their behavior. By Sunday night, I knew we were heading toward a bigger confrontation. Thomas's patience was thinning, Chloe's temper was flaring, and Eric was caught in the middle. The storm was coming, and I wasn't going to step aside when it hit. The storm broke on a Thursday night over a pot roast. It had been one of those long gray days that made everything feel heavier. I'd cooked early, letting the roast simmer in the oven so the house smelled warm when they all came in. I had been hoping, perhaps foolishly, that a good meal might soften the edges of the tension that had been hanging in the air for weeks. For the first 20 minutes, dinner was civil enough. Chloe kept her phone on the table but didn't talk much. Eric complimented the roast. Thomas made small talk about the weather. And then Chloe snapped. "This is ridiculous," she said abruptly, setting down her fork with a clatter. "It's been weeks, Mom. You've made your point. Now can we stop pretending this is about teaching us and admit you're just enjoying the control?" My fork hovered mid-air. "Control," I repeated. She leaned forward, eyes blazing. "Yes, you're punishing us because you like watching us squirm. You like that we have to ask for things now." Thomas didn't jump in to stop her. He just watched me waiting. I set my fork down. "You think this is about enjoyment? Do you have any idea what it's like to work for years to keep this family comfortable, only to be treated like an afterthought?" Chloe scoffed. "You're acting like we've been abusing you." "You have," I said, my voice steady but sharp. "Not physically. But every time you rolled your eyes when I said no, every time you joked about me being old-fashioned with money, every time you spent without thinking, it chipped away at me. And you never noticed." Eric cleared his throat. "She's right." Chloe turned on him. "Oh, so now you're her little spokesperson." Eric didn't flinch. "No. But I've been thinking. I don't even know what half the things I've bought over the last year are. And if I'm being honest, I've treated Mom like a bank too. Chloe's jaw tightened. So you're fine with living like this forever? Eric shrugged. If it means we learn something, yeah. Thomas finally spoke up. All right, enough. We're going in circles. Maggie, maybe there's a middle ground? You've made your point. Maybe we can start easing back into things. I shook my head. Not until I see that the respect is real. Not until it's consistent. I'm not putting things back the way they were just because it's uncomfortable for you now. Chloe pushed back her chair. You're impossible. Maybe I said quietly, but I'm not invisible anymore. The days that followed were cold. Chloe avoided me entirely, only coming down for meals if Thomas was in the kitchen. She cooked for herself once or twice, the smell of instant noodles drifting through the hallway. Eric, on the other hand, leaned into the new reality. He asked me one night if I could help him set up a budgeting app. We sat at the dining table with his laptop going through his expenses. Wow, he said, scrolling. I didn't realize how much money I was bleeding on little stuff. Coffee runs, delivery fees, random subscriptions I forgot about. That's what happens when you're not paying attention, I said. He gave me a sheepish smile. Guess you were right to cut me off. It wasn't victory. I felt it was relief. Someone was finally getting it. Thomas's shift came more slowly. One Saturday morning, I came downstairs to find him at the kitchen table with a pile of bills. I've been looking at what we spend every month, he said without looking up. We're careless. I'm careless. I poured myself coffee and sat down. I'm listening. He tapped one of the bills. We could cut a lot if we actually tracked this. I just never thought about it because you always handled it. I nodded. Exactly. You've been shielded from the consequences. He leaned back in his chair. Maybe we needed this. It wasn't an apology, but it was as close as I'd heard from him in years. Sunday evening brought a surprising twist. Chloe knocked on my bedroom door, a rarity lately. She stood there, arms crossed, but her voice was softer. I might need your help, she said. With what? Budgeting? I'm tired of not having enough for the things I want, but I don't want to keep borrowing or maxing out my own card. I kept my expression neutral. If I help you, you have to take it seriously. No arguing, no rolling your eyes. She gave a small nod. Fine. And for the first time in weeks, I saw a crack in her defiance. By the end of that week, something had shifted. The cards were still blocked, but the fights had stopped. They weren't fixed, not yet, but the frantic anger had cooled into something more thoughtful. For the first time since this began, I felt we might actually be getting somewhere. The first signs of respect came quietly, so quietly I almost missed them. It started with the dishes. One night after dinner, I came back into the kitchen expecting to find the usual mess. Instead, the counters were wiped down and the dishwasher was humming softly. A note sat on the counter in Chloe's handwriting. Thanks for cooking. I'll handle cleanup. I stood there a moment, the paper in my hand, unsure if it was a peace offering or just a momentary gesture. Still, I tucked the note into the drawer where I kept small, meaningful things. Eric's changes were even more visible. He had started taking his lunch to work every day, and on weekends he did odd jobs for neighbors, mowing lawns, fixing a squeaky fence, helping Mrs. Carson down the street with her garage. I didn't tell him outright, but I was proud. One afternoon I saw him coming back with a small grocery bag. Got dinner covered tonight, he said with a grin. Chicken stir-fry. It wasn't perfect. The chicken was slightly overcooked, the vegetables unevenly chopped, but it was made with effort, and that mattered more than the taste. Thomas was slower to change, but the shift was there. He started asking me before making purchases, even small ones. It wasn't about permission, it was about acknowledgement. One Friday, he came home with a bottle of wine and said, I thought we could enjoy this together tonight. I checked the budget, it fits. It was such a simple sentence, but it was a first in decades of marriage I checked the budget. Then came the test. It was Saturday morning when Chloe came into the kitchen looking both nervous and determined. "Mom, there's a short weekend course I want to take. It's about photography. Costs $200. I have $100 saved from my own work, but I'm short." I didn't answer right away. "Tell me why you want to do it." Her voice softened. "Because I want to start something that's mine. Something I can work at and maybe even earn from. But I can't do it if I can't afford the course." I studied her face. This wasn't the entitled tone I'd grown used to. This was genuine. "I'll cover the rest," I said finally, "but on one condition: you budget for the next 2 months to make up for it. No unnecessary spending." She smiled, a small, almost shy smile. "Deal." That night, we had dinner together without tension. Chloe talked about the course. Eric shared a funny story from one of his odd jobs, and Thomas, he listened. Really listened. It struck me then this was what I'd been fighting for. Not just financial responsibility, but a family that acknowledged effort, respected boundaries, and treated me as more than a resource. Still, I didn't unblock the cards yet. Not because I wanted to punish them further, but because I knew we weren't done. Respect is fragile. It needs time to become habit. I told myself I'd wait until I saw that these changes weren't just temporary adjustments to get their privileges back. They needed to be real, lasting. And as the days passed, I began to feel it. The house wasn't just quieter in conflict, it was warmer in tone. Small thank yous, shared chores, discussions about purchases. They were things I'd long stopped expecting. But deep down, I knew there was still one conversation left, the one that would determine whether I could truly let go of the resentment I'd been holding on to for years. That conversation was coming sooner than I thought. The final test came on an ordinary Tuesday, the kind of day that starts with no warning of the storm it's about to bring. It began with Eric. He came into the kitchen after work, his face flushed and his eyes bright with the kind of excitement I hadn't seen in him in years. "Mom," he said. Dropping his bag on the counter, I got offered a chance to buy some secondhand tools from a guy at work. Good quality, cheap. I could start taking on more handyman jobs if I had them. How much, I asked. $300. I've got 200 saved already. It wasn't an extravagant request. It wasn't about luxury or impulse. It was about growth. I nodded slowly. "If I help you with the rest, you'll keep every receipt track, every job, and put half of your profit into savings." His grin was instant. Deal. That same night, Chloe came into my room holding a printed flyer. "Photography course starts next week," she said almost shyly. "I've budgeted for transportation and materials. I even cut out my weekend coffee runs to make it work." I scanned her notes. She'd written down every expected expense in neat columns. It wasn't perfect, but it was more planning than she'd ever done in her life. "I'm impressed," I admitted. Her smile grew, but she didn't gloat. She just said, "Thanks. I'm trying." I was feeling proud cautiously, so when Thomas walked in later that evening, he had a tentative look in his eyes, the one he used when he was trying not to provoke me. "Can we talk?" he asked. We sat at the kitchen table and he took a deep breath. "I've been thinking about what you said, about feeling invisible. I didn't realize how much I'd taken you for granted. You've been the one holding this family together financially, emotionally, and I treated that like it was just normal." It was the closest thing to an apology I'd heard in years. "I appreciate you saying that," I told him. He hesitated. "So, does that mean the cards can come back?" I knew that moment was the decision point. Part of me wanted to say yes to reward the progress I'd seen, but another part whispered that letting go too soon might undo the changes. I chose the middle ground. "I'll unblock them," I said, "but there will be limits, spending caps, and I'll see every statement." This isn't about trust being broken, it's about building it in a way that lasts. Chloe, who had wandered in during the conversation, actually nodded. Fair enough. Eric grinned. Sounds reasonable. Thomas gave a small smile. Deal. The next day, I went to the bank and made the adjustments. Each card had a spending limit and alerts were sent to my phone for every purchase. It wasn't about control anymore, it was about transparency. When I came home, I put the cards on the kitchen counter. These are tools, not toys, I said. Use them with respect. For the first time in a long while, I believed they would. And then something unexpected happened. That weekend, Eric brought home a small potted plant for me. For the kitchen, he said simply. Chloe handed me an envelope with a note. First $50 toward paying you back. And Thomas. He poured me a glass of wine and said, to a better way forward. It wasn't perfection, but it was peace. And for me, that was enough. It was almost 3 weeks after I reinstated the cards when the first real challenge hit. It came in the form of a phone call on a Thursday evening. Eric's voice was tight. Mom, my car broke down. It's the transmission. The shop says it's going to cost nearly $1,400. I gripped the phone. That's a lot of money, Eric. I know. And I don't have it saved. Not all of it. There was a pause. But I'll figure something out. I'm not calling to ask you to cover it. I'm calling to ask if we can sit down and look at options together. That alone was different. In the past, he would have simply charged it to one of the cards and let me find out later on the bill. Come over after work, I told him. When he walked through the door that evening, he had already pulled up estimates from different repair shops, written out what he could afford now, and listed other jobs he could take on for extra cash. We went through each option, calculating the difference between what he had and what he needed. You're short by about $500, I said. He nodded. If you could help me with that, I can pay it back in 2 months. I've already lined up some weekend work. I studied him for a moment, then nodded. All right, but put it in writing, not because I don't trust you, but because I want you to take the commitment seriously. He didn't argue. He pulled a notepad toward him and wrote it out right then and there. The same week, Chloe faced her own test. She came into the kitchen one afternoon holding her phone. Mom, the photography course is offering an extra workshop with a professional. It's $150, and they're only taking 10 people. I raised an eyebrow. Do you have the money? I have $80 saved. I could use the card, but... She trailed off, biting her lip. I want your opinion first. Do you think it's worth it? That question, do you think it's worth it, was a sign of progress I couldn't ignore. We sat down together, looked at the details, and weighed whether the workshop would truly benefit her. In the end, she decided to skip it. I'll save the money for when I really need it, she said, sliding her phone back into her pocket. Thomas, too, faced a choice. A colleague invited him on a golf trip a weekend away, with hotel stays, dinners, and expensive greens fees. In the past, he would have said yes without a second thought, knowing the cost would quietly fold into our finances. Instead, he came into the living room one evening and said, I've been invited on this trip, but it's going to cost about $700. I'm thinking of skipping it. We've been trying to be more intentional, and I don't want to blow the budget. I was stunned. That's your choice to make, but I'm proud of you. He shrugged with a small smile. Maybe next year. The weekend after these decisions, I sat in the quiet kitchen early in the morning, coffee in hand, and realized something important. This wasn't just about blocking cards anymore. It was about watching my family rebuild their sense of responsibility one choice at a time. It hadn't been easy, and it still wasn't perfect, but the difference between who they were when I started this and who they were now was undeniable. Of course, I knew life had a way of testing people when they least expected it. And that next test, the biggest one yet, was just around the corner. It would show me whether their newfound discipline was real or just a phase. It started on a windy Sunday afternoon, just as I was settling in with a book. The phone rang, Chloe's number. Her voice was shaky. "Mom, I think I messed up." My stomach tightened. What happened? I was on my way to meet a friend for a photo shoot, and I rear-ended someone at a stoplight. My first question wasn't about the car. "Are you okay?" "I'm fine. No one's hurt." "But the bumper's a mess and the other driver wants to settle privately so they don't involve insurance. He says it'll be about $900. I closed my eyes. This was it, the kind of pressure that could crack all the progress we'd made. "Do you have the money?" I asked evenly. "No," she admitted. "I have $200 saved." I was hoping. "Stop right there," I said gently. "We'll talk when you get home." When she arrived, I could see the panic in her eyes. She was expecting me to hand over the money the old pattern. Instead, I made tea and sat her down at the kitchen table. "First," I said, "you're going to call 2 body shops tomorrow and get written estimates. Second, you're going to ask the other driver if he can give you a week to pay. Third, we'll figure out how much of this you can handle without me covering it all." She nodded, biting her lip. "So, you won't just pay it?" "No, Chloe, I'm not going to undo everything you've been learning." That same week, Eric's transmission, the one we'd just repaired, had another problem. The mechanic told him a smaller part was worn out, another $300 job, and Thomas's work announced a surprise pay cut due to budget adjustments. It was as if the universe had decided to test every single one of them at once. By Wednesday, Chloe returned with her estimates. "The cheapest one is $750, she said. "If I use all my savings, I'll have $550 left to cover. I can pick up 2 extra shifts at the cafe and sell my old camera lens. That'll cover most of it." "And the rest?" I asked. She hesitated. "If you could lend me $150, I can pay you back in a month." I nodded slowly. "I'll do it, but write it down like Eric did." She did right then and there. Eric handled his problem the same way. "I've got half of it in cash," he said. "Can you spot me the other half? I'll take more handyman jobs this month." Thomas, on the other hand, didn't ask for money at all. He came home and announced, "I'm canceling my golf club membership. It's $120 a month. We can use that to make up for my pay cut." I stared at him. "You love that club. I love my family more," he said simply. By the end of the month, Chloe had paid me back in full. Eric was halfway there. And Thomas. He surprised me by saying, "I don't think I'm going back to the club. I've been walking the park trail on weekends instead. Costs nothing and I actually like it." For the first time, I saw proof that these weren't temporary changes to get their cards back. This was real growth. But just as I was beginning to feel like my fight was over, an unexpected letter arrived in the mail, one that would dredge up old wounds and force me to face a truth I'd been avoiding about my own role in all of this. It wasn't just about their spending habits. It was about mine too. The envelope was thick, the kind that usually carried bank statements or formal notices. I almost tossed it into the pile of deal with later mail, but something about the sender's name caught my attention, our old joint financial advisor. I hadn't spoken to him in over 2 years. I sat at the kitchen table, sliding my finger under the flap, pulling out the neatly folded documents. The first page was a statement not from our current accounts, but from an old investment portfolio I'd nearly forgotten about. At the top, bold and impossible to miss, "Final distribution notice." I skimmed the numbers and my heart dropped. The balance was far less than it should have been, almost $20,000 less. I read again, slower this time. And then I saw it, a series of withdrawals, each one signed off by me. Only, I hadn't made them. At first, my mind jumped to the worst conclusion: fraud, identity theft. But as I looked closer, I recognized something more unsettling. The withdrawals had all happened within a 3-year window when I was so busy covering everyone's needs, tuition payments, credit card bills, emergency repairs, that I'd stopped looking at the long-term picture. Each transaction was legitimate. Each one had my signature. But they weren't for me. They'd been for Thomas, for Chloe, for Eric. I'd drained nearly a third of my retirement fund without realizing how fast it was going. I sat there for a long time staring at the paper, an odd mix of anger and shame rising in me. I had been so focused on their spending habits, their lack of respect for money, that I hadn't acknowledged my own role in feeding the problem. I had made it too easy for them. I'd taught them that I would always find a way, that I'd quietly sacrifice my own security to keep the peace. And now I was staring at the cost of that unspoken bargain. When Thomas came home that evening, I was still at the table. The papers were spread out in front of me. "What's all this?" he asked, hanging his jacket over the chair. "Do you remember the retirement account we set up years ago?" I asked quietly. "Sure. Why, it's almost gone." His brow furrowed. "What do you mean, almost gone?" "We agreed we wouldn't touch that." I slid the statements toward him. "We did touch it. Many times. For tuition. For the roof repairs. For your business shortfall that one year. For the kids' car repairs. I signed every withdrawal." He scanned the pages, his jaw tightening. I didn't realize it added up like this." "Neither did I admitted. "Because I didn't want to realize it. I thought I was protecting us. But all I was doing was making sure no one had to face the real cost of their choices." When Chloe and Eric came by later that week, I called a family meeting. They sat at the table side by side, a little wary the way people are when they expect bad news. I took a deep breath. "I've been hard on you these past few months, and I still stand by my reasons. But I found something, and I think you need to see it." I laid the statements in front of them. "What is this?" Eric asked. "My retirement account," I said. "The one I've been adding to since before either of you were born." Chloe's eyes skimmed the numbers. "Why is there so little left?" "Because I used it," I said. "For all of us. Every time someone needed money, I didn't take it from savings accounts we shared, I took it from here. Quietly. So no one would have to feel the weight of their decisions." They were both silent. Eric was the first to speak. "I didn't know." "I didn't tell you," I said. "And that's on me. But here's the thing, I let you live without consequence. I made it easy for you to think the money just existed, that it would always be there. And now I'm the one who's going to pay the price for that mistake when I'm too old to work." Chloe's voice was small. "Mom." "We didn't mean, I know you didn't mean to hurt me," I interrupted. "But it happened. And the only way this changes is if all of us start owning our choices, me included." We sat there for a long moment, the kind of silence that's heavier than shouting. Then Thomas leaned forward. "So what do we do?" I'd been thinking about that for hours before they arrived. "We set rules not just for the cards, but for how we handle emergencies, big expenses, and long-term planning, and every one of us contributes. No more invisible sacrifices. If something costs money, we face it together." Eric nodded. "That's fair." Chloe, still looking guilty, said, "I'll start putting money into your retirement fund. I can set up an auto transfer from my account every month." I hadn't expected that. My throat tightened. "That's kind of you." Over the next week, we made a plan. Eric committed to putting a portion of every extra job toward replenishing the account. Chloe scaled back some non-essential expenses to contribute more, and Thomas agreed to set aside a fixed percentage of his pay, no exceptions, no dipping into it for weekend trips or gadgets. I knew it wouldn't restore the lost $20,000 overnight, but it wasn't about the number anymore. It was about seeing them take ownership. And yet, I couldn't help feeling that this was only part of the story. Money wasn't the root of all our problems, respect was. And while this step brought us closer, I knew there was still one final conversation I needed to have, one that had nothing to do with accounts or budgets, but everything to do with how I was valued in this family. That conversation would change everything. The day I decided to have that final conversation, I woke up before sunrise. The house was quiet. No footsteps, no clinking dishes, just the low hum of the refrigerator and the faint sound of wind against the windows. I made a pot of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, my hands wrapped around the mug, letting the heat seep into my fingers. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about something far more important: the way I had allowed myself to be treated for years. For too long, I had been the invisible safety net, the one who solved problems, smoothed over conflicts, and quietly absorbed every bit of disrespect disguised as family needs. I had given without expecting thanks, but somewhere along the way, they had stopped even seeing me as a person with needs of my own. Today, that would change. I called Thomas first. "I need you to come home early tonight. We're having a family meeting. All of us." His voice was hesitant. "Is this about the retirement account again?" "No," I said. "It's about me." By 6 o'clock, everyone was in the living room. Chloe sat cross-legged on the couch. Eric leaned against the armrest and Thomas took his usual chair. They were quiet, waiting for me to speak. I stood in the center of the room, not hiding behind papers or numbers this time. "I've been thinking a lot these past few weeks," I began. "About money, yes, but also about how we treat each other in this family." They exchanged glances, unsure where I was going. "When I blocked the cards, it wasn't just about stopping the spending," I continued. "It was about respect." Somewhere along the way, I became the family's fixer, the one who sacrifices, the one who cleans up after everyone's mistakes, the one who never says no. And instead of appreciating that, you started to expect it, to feel entitled to it. Eric's jaw tightened. Chloe looked down at her hands. Thomas didn't meet my eyes. "I'm not angry for what's been spent. I'm angry for how I've been treated while spending it. I've been dismissed, talked over, and made to feel like I'm overreacting whenever I brought up concerns. That ends now." Thomas finally spoke. "You're right. I've done that. I've brushed off your concerns because I thought you'd handle it like you always do." I turned to him. And that made me feel like my only value was in what I could provide, not in who I am. Chloe's voice was small. "I didn't realize I was doing that to you." "That's the point," I said. "You didn't realize. And that's what hurts most." I took a deep breath, my voice firm but calm. "From now on, I'm not just the one who manages the bills or bails you out. I'm your equal in this family. That means you speak to me with respect. You include me in decisions that affect all of us. And you understand that I have limits: financial, emotional, and physical." Eric finally met my gaze. "Mom, we've taken you for granted. I've taken you for granted. I'm sorry. I don't just want apologies," I said. "I want change. And that change has to be consistent, not just when I threaten to take away the cards." We agreed to a few ground rules right there in the living room. Transparency: no large purchases without a family discussion. Shared responsibility: emergencies are to be handled collectively, not dumped on one person. Respect in communication: no dismissing someone's concerns, no matter how inconvenient they sound. Personal boundaries: everyone gets to say no without being guilt-tripped. It felt strange laying it all out like that. Part of me worried they'd see it as overkill. But as I looked at them, really looked, I saw something I hadn't seen in a long time. They were listening. Not just waiting for me to finish, but really hearing me. Thomas reached over and took my hand. "You've carried us for so long. It's time we carried you too." For the first time in years, I believed him. Later that night, as the house settled into quiet again, I sat alone in the kitchen, my coffee long gone cold. I realized this conversation was the real turning point, not the blocked cards, not the budgets, not the repayment plans. Because if respect was restored, everything else, money included, would fall into place. But I also knew life had a way of testing promises, and the final test was coming sooner than any of us expected. It happened just 3 weeks later. I was upstairs folding laundry when I heard Thomas's footsteps pounding up the stairs, 2 at a time. His voice was tight, almost panicked. "Maggie, we need to talk. Now." I set the basket down. "What is it?" "It's Eric," he said. "His car broke down on the interstate. Transmission's gone. He's stranded and, well, you know how much that'll cost. For a moment, I felt that old familiar instinct grab the checkbook, solve the problem, fix it before anyone else felt stress. But then I remembered our rules: transparency, shared responsibility, no silent sacrifices. "Where's Chloe?" I asked. "She's on her way home from work," Thomas said. "I thought maybe we could—" "No," I cut in. "We're not making decisions without everyone present. That was the agreement." By the time Chloe arrived, Eric was calling from the mechanic's shop. The transmission replacement would cost nearly $4,500. His voice was heavy with dread. "I don't have it, Mom," he admitted. "And I can't get to work without a car." "If I miss shifts, I can't pay rent, Eric," I interrupted gently. "We're not saying no. But this isn't just on me. We're going to handle this together the way we promised." I put him on speakerphone so everyone could hear. We gathered in the living room, a strange mirror of the meeting we'd had just weeks earlier. "All right," I began. "Here's the situation. Eric needs $4,500. He can cover part of it with his emergency savings. How much do you have?" "About $1,200, he said reluctantly. "That leaves $3,300, I said. "So how do we want to split this?" Thomas shifted in his seat. "I can cover $1,500. Chloe hesitated. "I don't have a lot, but I can do $800. I'll just cut back for a month or two." That left $1,000, which I agreed to cover, but only after making sure everyone understood it was a contribution, not me swooping in to handle it all. Eric was quiet for a moment. I didn't expect you all to chip in like this." "That's because before you didn't have to," I said. "But this is what shared responsibility looks like." The mechanic said it would take 3 days to fix the car. During that time, Chloe offered to drive Eric to work, and Thomas rearranged his schedule to help when she couldn't. It was small, but to me, it was proof. They weren't just paying lip service to the rules we'd made, they were living them. On the third day, when Eric finally got his car back, he showed up at my door with an envelope. Inside was $200, his first repayment toward what I'd contributed. "I'll pay you the rest within 2 months," he promised. And I mean it. I smiled, not so much because of the money, but because of what it meant. This wasn't the careless, entitled son who used to drain accounts without thinking. This was someone who understood the value of what he was asking for and the respect that came with repaying it. That night, I found myself thinking about how far we'd come. It hadn't been that long since I'd blocked those bank cards in frustration, certain that my family would never change. Now I could see that blocking the cards hadn't just been about cutting off money. It had been about forcing a reset, about showing them a version of me that had limits, boundaries, and expectations. And they had risen to meet it. But I also knew families don't change in a straight line. Old habits have a way of creeping back. And while this was a victory, I wasn't naive enough to think the battle was over. Which is why, in the back of my mind, I started planning for the next time we'd be tested and making sure I'd be ready. Because now, more than ever, I understood something important. Respect isn't something you ask for once. It's something you insist on every single day. It came from Chloe, and it hit me harder than I expected. It was a Friday night when she showed up at my door, her eyes red and swollen. She didn't even bother with a hello. "Mom," she said, voice breaking, "I need your help. But it's not like the other times." I gestured for her to sit, already bracing myself. She took a deep breath. "Ethan asked me to marry him." I blinked. "That's good news, isn't it?" She hesitated. "It is. But I want to pay for the wedding myself. And I don't have nearly enough saved." I was hoping there it was. The moment I'd been dreading. The old me would have smiled, said, "Of course, sweetheart," and emptied a savings account without a second thought. After all, weddings are supposed to be joyful. Helping her would feel natural. But this was different. I had spent months building boundaries, teaching them responsibility, and showing them that money wasn't an endless stream flowing from me. And here was my daughter asking me to set all that aside for the sake of a once-in-a-lifetime event. How much are we talking? I asked cautiously. She bit her lip. Around $12,000. I can cover about $5,000 if I work overtime for the next year. But that still leaves $7,000. I stared at her. Chloe, you know what we agreed on. No big expenses without planning. And this isn't an emergency. This is a choice. Her voice cracked. But it's my wedding, Mom. Don't you want it to be special? I felt the sting. Of course I wanted it to be special. But I also knew what would happen if I said yes. I leaned forward. Chloe, let me tell you something I wish someone had told me before I got married. The wedding is one day. The marriage is every day after that. If you start your marriage in debt, or by leaning on someone else to carry the weight, it sets the wrong tone from the start. She swallowed hard. So you're saying no, I'm saying I'll help, but not by just handing you the money. I'll match whatever you save from now until the wedding. If you save $3,000, I'll give you $3,000. That way, we're building it together. For a moment, I thought she'd storm off. But instead, she nodded slowly, tears brimming. Okay, that's fair. I thought you'd be more excited. I reached over and took her hand. I am excited. But my excitement isn't going to undo the lessons we've all been learning. I can love you and hold you accountable at the same time. Over the next few weeks, I watched her transform that disappointment into determination. She picked up freelance photography jobs, sold unused clothes online, and even offered to tutor beginner photographers for extra cash. One afternoon, she came by with a grin and a bank statement. I'm already at $1,800, sorry, your turn to match soon. I laughed. At this rate, I might owe you more than I planned. Seeing her work for it made me realize something important. Sometimes the best gift you can give someone isn't money, it's the confidence they build by earning it themselves. By the time spring rolled around, she had saved $4,000. I wrote her a check for the same amount, proud not just of the number, but of the mindset she had built to get there. It wasn't always easy holding the line, especially when emotions were involved. But in that moment, I knew we were finally living in the family dynamic I had been fighting for all along, one built on mutual respect, shared effort, and the understanding that love isn't measured in dollars. And yet there was still one final moment, a quiet, private decision that would bring this entire journey full circle. My name is Margaret Lane, and as I sit here tonight, the house is quiet in a way that feels different. Not empty, not tense, but peaceful. It's been months since I blocked those bank cards, and the ripple effects have been nothing short of life-changing for all of us. When I first did it, I'll admit there was anger behind my decision. I felt disrespected, used, and invisible in my own home. I thought cutting off the money would be a punishment, a way to make them see what I was worth. But somewhere along the way, it became something more. It became a turning point. Thomas now talks to me about every major decision before making it, not because I demand it, but because he wants to. Eric has started budgeting, tracking his spending in a little notebook like I used to do when I was his age. And Chloe? She's turned into one of the most resourceful young women I've ever known, building her wedding fund through pure determination. There are still moments when I feel those old patterns tugging at me, the urge to fix everything to protect them from every bump in the road. But I've learned that love doesn't mean shielding someone from consequences. Sometimes love means stepping back so they can stand on their own. I think back to the night of that first family meeting. How hard it was to look them in the eyes and admit how much their behavior had hurt me. I didn't know if they'd take me seriously. I didn't know if they'd change. And yet, here we are. We've had emergencies since then. We've had moments of disagreement. But we've handled them together. No one assumes I'll just cover it anymore. No one brushes off my concerns. In the process, I've also changed. I no longer measure my worth by how much I give or how much I can endure. My value isn't in my bank account, it's in my voice, my boundaries, and the way I choose to live my life. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this: respect isn't given just because you've been around the longest or because you've sacrificed the most. It's earned, and sometimes you have to fight for it, even with the people you love. I fought for mine, and I won. Not with shouting, not with ultimatums, but with quiet, unwavering resolve. So if you've ever felt unseen, unheard, or undervalued in your own home, remember, you have the right to set the terms for how you're treated. And once you do, the people who truly love you will rise to meet them. That's what happened here. And I hope it happens for you too. If you've been through something similar, I'd love to hear your story in the comments. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to Grace's Truth, and turn on notifications so you never miss another story. Because sometimes the truth isn't just what happens to us, it's what we choose to do about it.